By trapping them in poverty, don't you make them a little more dependent on the government? So it's kind of, it almost seems like it could be done on purpose.
Assuming they're smart enough to realize that, yeah. You never really know if these policies are out of ignorance or, they're deliberately being deceptive,
Welcome back to Yanasa TV's As a Man Thinketh. Today, we're with Peter Schiff. Peter is the CEO of Euro Pacific Capital. He runs a podcast known as The Peter Schiff Show, and he was an economic advisor to Ron Paul's presidential campaign in 2008. He's become a voice of reason in our current economic environment of massive speculation and inflation. I wanted to talk to you about inflation because a lot of our viewers are concerned about the current economic environment. We're seeing these inflation numbers coming out of the government, but the inflation feels like it's a lot higher, especially in the agricultural sector when you're looking at price of inputs. So what are your thoughts on the current numbers and whether or not they're accurate?
First of all, you have to bear in mind that rising prices are a consequence of inflation. They do not constitute inflation themselves. Inflation actually has to do with the expansion of the money supply. Because if you think about the word inflate, it literally means expand, right? You inflate a balloon with air, the balloon expands. Prices don't expand. They can go up, they can go down, but they don't expand. It's only money supply that expands. And in fact, when money supply contracts, that's what's called deflation. But whenever you create more money, and now that money is available to bid for goods, you're going to get higher prices than the prices that would have prevailed absent the additional money. And why do we have all this money printing right now? Well, because the government is running enormous and unprecedented deficits that need to be financed. And so therefore, the Federal Reserve is having to create all this money, inflate the money supply in order to enable the government to spend all this money that it's not collecting in taxes. And so when the government does that, the price of everything goes up. And so rather than paying for government with higher taxes, we pay for government with higher prices, which is why when you boil it down, inflation really amounts to a tax. And it's the tax we're all paying for all the stimulus and the bailouts and whatever you want to call all this COVID relief and prior stimulus efforts. We're paying for it now with higher prices. And you're right, if you look at the prices that are actually being paid, the prices that consumers are dealing with, the true extent of those increases is much greater than what is reflected in the official government numbers that purport to report on prices, because they really don't do that, because those indexes by design were engineered to produce lower prices than what is actually happening, because there's a whole methodology that the government uses. When they take the data, the raw data, and they put it into a formula, and by the time they adjust it and make their substitutions or their hedonics or all the different things that they do to smooth it on out, by the time you get the final number, it's well below what the actual numbers were that went into the equation.
By the government kind of taxing us with higher inflation and driving those numbers up, is it decreasing the value of their debt? Is that a way of trying to get out of debt?
Well, sure. I mean, one of the things that happens with inflation is you have a transfer of wealth from creditors to debtors. So the people who loan money are worse off, and the people who borrowed it are better off. Because under inflation, you borrow money and you use that borrowed money to buy real assets. And then in the future, when you pay back the loan, the money that you're paying back has lost value. So the lender is not getting back the real value of what he loaned. Now, normally you make that up with interest rates, right? The lender will factor in the inflation into the interest rate, but interest rates are at zero. I mean, you get nothing really as a saver to help compensate you for what you lose to inflation. So it's all loss and no gain. And so the government is the world's biggest debtor, the US federal government. So the government, more than anyone else in the world, benefits from inflation because the value of its debts are being diminished. So that's another reason that it causes it. But the way you can look at inflation as a tax and understand it is, let's say, I've got, $100,000 and the government wants to take $10,000 away from me and give it to somebody else, right? They're going to tax me $10,000 and give it to somebody else, right? Okay, well, now I'm going to have $90,000 to spend, and that other person is going to have 10, right? So I can buy less stuff because that other guy is now going to buy stuff that I can't buy anymore because I only have 90,000. He's got 10, right? But prices don't go up because in aggregate, we're only spending $100,000. It's just that somebody else has got 10,000 of my 100 that I can't spend. Well, what if the government doesn't take any of my money? It just prints up $10,000 and hands it to some other person. Now I have my same 100,000, and now this new guy has 10,000. Well, assuming the supply of goods and services hasn't changed, which it shouldn't change because all they did is create new money, what's going to happen? Well, that new guy who has $10,000 that he didn't have before is now competing with me to buy stuff. And so prices may go up by 10% because now there's 10% more money to buy stuff. So now everything that used to cost $1 costs $11, right? If it cost $100, now it costs $110. So now, assuming I spend all my money, I'm going to buy 10% less stuff because everything costs 10% more, right? So I'm going to end up buying less stuff exactly the way I would have bought less stock if the government took my $10,000 away from me. But instead of taking my money away from me, they took my purchasing power away from me. They gave that purchasing power to the other guy. And now as a result, I can buy less stuff. So I'm basically indifferent between the tax of $10,000 that reduces my money to $90,000 or printing $10,000 that reduces my purchasing power to $90,000. Either way, I'm in the same situation. And this other guy got $10,000 for free that he didn't earn because it was either taken from me and given to him, or the government just printed it and gave it to him. So the guy that gets the money, he's better off, and I'm worse off. And so this is what's going on. So when the government has all these programs and they claim the rich are going to pay for them, the rich are not going to pay for them because there's not enough money there and the taxes are very low and the rich can avoid paying them. The people who end up paying the taxes are the middle class who get hit with inflation. And so when they say, oh, nobody who earns under $400,000 is going to pay for the infrastructure bill or is going to pay for the Build Back Better bill, that's a complete lie. It's the middle class that are going to get the bill, and they're going to pay it in the form of higher prices.
So really with inflation, the ones who end up hurting the most are the middle class and the lower classes who are spending most of their money on rents and food and energy costs.
That's always the case. Inflation is a tax that hits the middle class and the working poor the hardest. That's why it's the worst possible way for the government to raise money. But unfortunately, it's the most politically expedient because they don't have to officially raise anybody's taxes, and they can try to blame other people for rising prices. The government will never accept responsibility. They're not going to tell the voters, we caused this. Right? It's our fault, that you're paying higher prices because you wanted all these government programs and that's how you're paying for it. They're never going to be honest and tell the public that. But also, the policies that they are pursuing, these inflationary policies, are undermining economic growth. And the people who need economic growth the most are the poor, right? Or the middle class, because they have the most to gain from a growing economy. If you're already rich, it doesn't really matter if the economy grows or not. I mean, you're already rich, right? So you already have the things that you need. And maybe you would get even richer with economic growth, but it's not as important to you, incrementally as the poor guy that wants to be middle class, or the middle class guy that wants to be upper class. You need economic growth. You need a vibrant economy. And the Fed is undermining all that with all this inflation. These artificially low interest rates are preventing the capital investment that would be necessary to really grow the economy. Instead, we're just perpetuating bubbles that let the rich get richer, but it doesn't let the poor get richer or the middle class get richer. In many ways, it traps them in poverty and prevents them from clawing their way out.
By trapping them in poverty, don't you make them a little more dependent on the government? So it's it almost seems like it could be done on purpose.
Assuming they're smart enough to realize that, yeah. I mean, because government always likes the voter to depend on government, because then they can count on their vote, right? Once you've got a voter dependent on a government check, you always get their vote if you promise to continue the check. And if anybody threatens to take that check away, well, they're never going to get the vote, right? And so the more people who depend on government, the easier it is for the politicians to stay in power, because now the people believe the government is their source of, their prosperity, that the only way for the government or for them to succeed is with government. And, Harry Brown, who passed away years ago, but was a big libertarian author. But one of the things he used to say, and I think it's a great quote, I use it a lot myself, is the government is great at breaking your leg and then giving you a crutch and saying, you see, without me, you couldn't walk.
I appreciate you coming on and chatting with some of our viewers, and hopefully they'll go and check out your podcast. I know you always put out some great information on all the market reports. So if there's more information that people would like to hear, hopefully they check you out.
Yeah, I do 2 or 3 podcasts a week. Schiffradio.com is my website. It's also on my YouTube channel. But anywhere, iTunes, Stitcher, any of these various platforms that have podcasts, chances are you could find my podcast on there. So make a habit of listening. Tell your friends to listen, because most of the mainstream coverage of the economy is completely wrong. It's really biased and trying to perpetuate these myths about government and capitalism. And, so if you want to know what's actually happening and why, my podcast is a good way to do that. I talk politics, talk economics, I talk the markets. And then more importantly, too, if you want to protect yourself, not just educate yourself and help to educate others, but really protect yourself from this coming dollar crisis and try to minimize the impact that it has on you personally. Right? I said inflation is a tax. Well, you can avoid the tax by avoiding what's being taxed, which is U.S. dollars and U.S. dollar denominated investments. So I have a brokerage firm and asset management company where I'm working with clients to try to build portfolios that will not only preserve their wealth during this period, but actually enhance it. There are people that are going to profit as a result of what's going to happen. I mean, a lot of people are going to suffer, but there will be winners, right? There's always winners and losers. And since you have the choice, we're going to lose as Americans. Everybody is going to lose as an American, but we could still win as an investor, And so, but in order to do that, you have to have the right portfolio that factors in the end game and what's going to happen in the long run. Forget about all the noise right now during the bubble. It's what's there when the bubble pops, right? It's like they say, when the tide goes out, we know who's swimming naked, right? What I'm doing is making sure that my clients, got a suit on and, they're ready for the tide to come out. And I can help you, create the right type of globally diversified portfolio that will hedge inflation and that will give you the type of income streams that you can reliably count on to help offset the rising cost of living. So people can, look me up at Europe Pacific Capital or my asset management company, Europe Pacific Funds, epacfunds.com. And also I mentioned gold and silver. Schiff Gold is the best place that I know to get the best prices on gold and silver. This is for physical delivery. You want to get gold and silver coins and bars shipped to your house, contact Schiff Gold to get it.